The rain had turned the city into a restless drumbeat, striking down on rooftops and gutters with unrelenting force. Karina adjusted the small black umbrella above her head as she stepped off the bus, the evening shift at St. Augustine's Hospital finally behind her. The fabric of her scrubs clung damp to her arms and her shoes squelched with every step. She hated working late, hated returning to her quiet street alone. The darkness always seemed thicker after a storm, the corners of the city humming with dangers she pretended not to see. Her street lamp flickered as if straining against the rain, light blinking in irregular pulses. Karina moved quickly, hugging the handle of the umbrella with one hand while clutching her worn leather satchel with the other. The night was heavy with the smell of ozone and wet concrete. A gust of wind shoved at her back, flipping her umbrella inside out. "Damn it," she muttered, tugging it closed. The rain splashed across her face, streaking her glasses. She wiped them against her sleeve, though it hardly mattered. Everything was blurred by the downpour. The loneliness felt sharper tonight, cutting through her exhaustion. Passing apartments glowed faintly with laughter and warm lights, families huddled together against the storm. Her own place would be dark and silent, the kettle her only company. Sometimes she wondered if this was all life had for her. Shift after shift, the ache of saving people who never remembered her name, and the hollow quiet waiting at home. Karina's steps slowed. She tilted her head, frowning. Through the roar of rain, another sound threaded its way into her awareness. A stumbling shuffle, a muffled groan. At first, she thought it was the wind battering trash cans, but then she saw it. A figure staggering down the deserted street ahead. The man's outline wavered beneath the flickering light, broad-shouldered yet uneven, clutching his side. Her heart kicked hard in her chest. "Sir?" she called, though her voice was nearly drowned by thunder. The man turned slightly, as if he'd heard her, and even from a distance she could see the dark stains spreading across his shirt. Blood. The realization shot through her like lightning. He swayed, trying to take another step, but his knees buckled. "Wait!" Karina sprinted forward, her umbrella tumbling from her hand, clattering uselessly onto the wet pavement. The rain immediately poured down on her, soaking through her scrubs in seconds, plastering her hair against her forehead. She didn't care. She reached him just as he collapsed onto the slick pavement, his weight crashing hard against the ground. God. She dropped to her knees beside him, slipping her arms under his shoulders to try and prop him up. His face was pale, lips pressed in a thin line, and his breathing came shallow and sharp. She glanced around wildly. No one else was in sight. The street was deserted, the storm driving everyone else inside. And then recognition jolted through her like a second bolt of lightning. Robert. The name screamed inside her head. She knew him. Everyone did. The Mafia boss. The shadow behind half the city's whispers. His reputation was inked into every corner of the hospital where she worked. Injured men arriving with gunshot wounds, victims whispering his name with terror, colleagues lowering their voices whenever his reach was mentioned. He was power, violence, untouchable fear, and now, impossibly, he was bleeding in her arms. Karina's pulse thrashed. Every instinct screamed at her to let go, to walk away, to run before anyone saw her with him. If anyone thought she was helping Robert, her life could be ruined, her job gone, her safety gone, her anonymity shattered. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Why you? Why here?" But his eyes opened, storm gray and unwavering even in pain. He looked at her as though he recognized her, not by name, but as someone who had made a choice in this moment. And something inside her, that stubborn, unshakable piece of her trained to save lives, snapped into place. "Can you hear me?" she demanded. His eyelids fluttered once, and he let out a low grunt. His hand clutched his abdomen tighter, blood slipping warm and slick against her fingers. Karina swallowed hard. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't leave him. She thought of her oath, of the dozens of lives she had patched back together when others had turned away. If she let him die here, she would carry it forever, no matter what kind of man he was. "You're hurt bad. You can't stay here. You'll die out in the rain." He tried to push her away with surprising strength, shaking his head once, as if refusing her help. But when he tried to rise, his body betrayed him, slumping again into her hold. "Stop fighting me," she snapped, her voice trembling with urgency, her chest tight with conflict. "I know who you are. I know what you've done. But right now you're bleeding and I don't get to choose who deserves saving." The words cut through the storm, startling even her. She wasn't sure if she meant them for him or herself. With effort, she dragged one of his arms across her shoulders and leveraged her own body against his. He was heavy, so heavy she nearly fell with him again, but stubborn determination kept her upright. Inch by inch, she rose, gritting her teeth as she bore his weight. The man let out a low groan but didn't resist this time. The rain poured harder, masking the sound of their movements. Karina forced her legs to move, guiding him off the pavement. Her apartment was only 3 blocks away, tucked into a quieter side of the neighborhood. 3 blocks. That was all. She could manage 3 blocks, couldn't she? Her mind spun as they staggered forward. Every step screamed danger. What if someone saw them? What if his enemies followed? What if helping him made her a target? She would lose everything. The fragile safety she had clung to, the quiet anonymity she had built. And yet, every time she glanced at his face, pale and taut with pain, she felt the answer to every question settle heavily inside her. She could not leave him to die. Not here. Not like this. Her arms burned with the effort of supporting him. She staggered once, nearly losing her grip, but his fingers latched weakly around her shoulder, steadying both of them. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The storm swallowed her words, but in the corner of her vision, she thought she saw his lips twitch as if he'd heard. They reached the intersection, her lungs burning with effort, rain soaking through every layer of her clothing. The glow of her building's lights came into view, faint but steady. A beacon. Relief surged through her, making her knees weak. Just a few more steps. Her arms tightened around him anyway. Whatever else he was, tonight he was just a man bleeding in the rain, and she couldn't walk away. Together, step by step, they moved toward her door. If someone bleeding in front of you wasn't a stranger, but the most feared Mafia boss in the city, would you save him or let fate take its course? Karina's door slammed shut behind them with a dull thud, sealing the storm outside. She half-dragged, half-guided Robert into the tiny living room, her arms trembling from the effort of supporting his weight. The smell of rain and iron clung to him, filling her space with an intensity she couldn't escape. She eased him onto the sofa, his body sinking into the cushions like stone. Her chest heaved, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably as she backed away for a moment, pressing her hand against her lips. What was she doing? Of all people to bring into her home, why him? Robert. The name itself was a danger, whispered in hospital hallways and muttered in back alleys. She had seen the aftermath of his world in ER rooms, bullet wounds, bruised ribs, lifeless bodies that spoke only in silence. She had always told herself she was glad to keep her distance from that side of the city. Yet here he was, bleeding on her sofa, the rain still dripping from his ruined suit onto her carpet. Karina shut her eyes tightly for a moment, steadying her breath. She wanted safety, normalcy. She wanted nights where the only thing she worried about was whether her kettle would whistle before she dozed off, and now she had brought in a storm fiercer than the one outside. But she couldn't stop herself. Saving people was what she did. And as much as she feared him, she couldn't ignore the vulnerability in his eyes as he slumped forward, his hand pressed desperately to his wound. Her body moved on instinct. She rushed to the small cupboard above the sink and yanked down her medical kit, one she kept well stocked because the hospital's supplies often failed her patients. She crouched by him, flipping it open, her fingers shaking. "Lie back," she said firmly. Robert's storm-gray eyes flickered to her, sharp despite his pallor. He didn't move. "You know who I am," he murmured, voice gravelly, laced with pain. Karina swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Yes, and you're still bleeding." Something unreadable passed across his face. Surprise, maybe, or curiosity. Slowly, as if conceding to her defiance, he leaned back against the sofa. Karina's hands worked quickly, peeling his blood-soaked shirt aside. The gash across his side was jagged, cruel, but not fatal if treated properly. She cleaned it, her stomach twisting at the sight of so much blood. Her mind screamed warnings at her with every press of gauze. He's dangerous. He's untouchable. If anyone finds out... But her hands didn't stop. "Hold still," she whispered, focusing on the rhythm of her stitching. Her hair clung wet to her cheeks, her soaked clothes leaving her shivering. Robert didn't flinch once, though his jaw tightened. "You're not afraid?" His voice was quiet, but it wasn't a question. It was a challenge. Karina bit down on the instinct to laugh bitterly. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice raw. "But fear doesn't stop bleeding." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the storm rattling against the windows. Robert studied her, his eyes sharp as knives but softer at the edges now. A low murmur escaped his lips, half delirious. "Victor, keep them out. Don't let them..." He hissed as pain stole his words. Karina froze, needle trembling in her grip. Victor. She had heard that name before, whispered in the same circles as Robert. His right hand, his shadow. Whoever these them were, they were close enough to haunt him even now. "Who's after you?" she asked quietly, though part of her didn't want the answer. Robert's eyes flicked open, sudden and sharp, as if he realized what he'd said. His lips pressed shut, refusing. But she had heard enough. There were enemies. Somewhere beyond her walls, maybe even in her street, there were men hunting him. And now, by dragging him in, she had painted a target on herself too. When she finally tied off the last stitch, her hands hovered for a moment over the bandage. She let out a slow exhale and sat back, wiping her trembling fingers on a towel. "You'll live," she said, "if you rest, and if you don't reopen it." Robert's mouth curved faintly, though it wasn't quite a smile. "You saved me." Karina shook her head. "Don't make it sound like something noble. I did what I had to do." For a long moment, his gaze lingered on her, unreadable. Then his eyes closed, his body sagging as exhaustion pulled at him. Karina rose, her knees weak, and stepped into the kitchen. She poured water into a glass with unsteady hands, her mind a storm louder than the one outside. She had just treated Robert, the man half the city feared, the man she had sworn to stay far away from. She thought of Elise, her best friend, who had warned her countless times about getting tangled in other people's messes. Elise would tell her she was insane, that she had invited death into her living room. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Karina grabbed it quickly, her thumb swiping across the screen. A message from Elise blinked up at her. "Made it home okay? Roads are flooded? Stay safe." Karina stared at it for a long moment before typing back, "I'm fine. Just tired." She hesitated, her thumb hovering. She almost added more, almost confessed, but she deleted it all and hit send. When she returned to the living room, Robert was awake again, his gaze sharp despite the weariness. "You should leave me," he said suddenly, his tone flat, as if testing her. "Forget this happened." Karina's heart thudded. She wanted to. She wanted to shove him out into the rain and lock the door. But the truth was already there, sitting like a weight in her chest. She couldn't. Instead, she set the glass of water on the table beside him. "Drink." Robert studied her again, as if trying to unravel her. Then, without a word, he obeyed. The room fell into uneasy quiet. Karina sat across from him, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, her wet scrubs still clinging cold. She thought of her life before this moment. Monotony, loneliness, safety. Now everything was shifting, and she wasn't sure she could stop it. Through the hush, Robert finally spoke. "You're braver than most men I've met." Karina's throat tightened. "Don't mistake fearlessness for bravery. I'm still afraid of you." For the first time, a flicker of something human passed over his face. Weariness, maybe, or something deeper, hidden under the iron mask. He leaned his head back, his breathing more even now, and for a fleeting second, he looked less like a king of shadows and more like a man brought low by blood and pain. And in that moment, Karina's fear bent beneath something sharper. Curiosity. Because for the first time, she wondered who Robert was when the legend fell away. The wail of distant sirens rose and faded again, thin beneath the storm, but enough to make her chest tighten. Somewhere beyond her walls, enemies were circling. Somewhere out there, men were whispering his name like wolves scenting blood. And now, unknowingly, she had stepped into their hunt. Would you risk everything to help someone the world fears? Karina woke with a start, her neck stiff from sleeping upright in the chair. Pale morning light filtered through her curtains, washing her small apartment in muted gray. The storm had passed, but the echo of it lingered in her bones. She blinked against the heaviness in her eyes, her thoughts racing back to the night before. Blood, rain, Robert collapsing in her arms. Her gaze darted to the sofa. Empty. The cushions were indented, a faint smear of dried blood on the towel she'd laid out, but Robert himself was gone. Karina shot to her feet, her pulse pounding. For one terrifying moment, she thought she'd imagined it all. That exhaustion had played tricks on her. But the half-emptied glass of water on the table and the faint scent of iron in the air told her the truth. He had been here, and now he wasn't. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying herself. Relief warred with fear. If he was gone, maybe she could pretend none of it had happened. Maybe she could slip back into her ordinary life. But deep down, she knew better. Men like Robert didn't just vanish. They left shadows that clung. She pulled on a dry sweater, her hair still damp from the night before, and stepped toward the door. The urge for air, just one breath outside, overpowered her trembling hesitation. She twisted the knob and pulled it open. The world outside had changed. Her quiet street, the one she had walked alone for years, was unrecognizable. Black cars lined both curbs like sentinels. Engines idled low, their hum vibrating through the morning air. And everywhere she looked, men in black suits stood in formation, at least 300 of them, faces hard, eyes scanning for unseen threats. Karina's stomach dropped. This wasn't a street anymore. It was a fortress. One of the men shifted, and for the first time, she realized every gaze had turned toward her doorway. It was as if she had been expected, as if the whole street had been waiting for her to emerge. She gripped the doorframe, her knees weak. Why were they here? Why her? The answer came like a cold blade to her spine. Robert. By helping him, by stitching his wound, she had tied herself to him. And in his world, ties were chains. His enemies would come, and they wouldn't care that she was innocent. Vulnerability was blood in the water, and men like them loved the taste of it. Her breath hitched. She wanted to retreat, to slam the door and disappear into the safety of her apartment. But before she could move, a familiar voice cut through the silence. "Karina." She turned sharply. Robert stood at the end of the street, stepping out of a sleek car. He looked transformed from the man she had seen bleeding hours before. His hair was slicked back, his clothes crisp and dark, every inch of him radiating authority. Only the slight stiffness in his movement betrayed the wound she had stitched. And yet, even wounded, his presence was overwhelming. He walked toward her slowly, every soldier's gaze following him until he stood at the bottom of her steps, his storm gray eyes locked on hers, steady and unyielding. "You shouldn't look so surprised," he said quietly, his tone carrying the weight of inevitability. Karina's throat went dry. "You were gone." I couldn't stay, Robert replied, but leaving you unprotected wasn't an option. Her pulse raced. I don't need this. I didn't ask for this. His gaze hardened. You saved me. That makes you mine to protect. The word mine lodged in her chest, sharp and heavy. She hated how it made her shiver. I don't belong to you, she whispered. A faint smile touched his mouth, humorless. Tell that to them. He tilted his head toward the rows of soldiers watching silently. And my enemies, who can trace my survival last night to you. His expression darkened. They'll come for you because they always do. They kill to send messages. And you've already been written into mine. Karina stumbled back a step, the enormity of it crashing over her. It didn't matter that she wanted a normal life. It didn't matter that she had never asked for this. The rumor alone was enough to bind her fate to his. As if to confirm it, one of the soldiers stepped forward, murmuring low to Robert, but loud enough for her to hear. Word is spreading. They say she's yours. Karina's heart lurched. No, she said, her voice breaking. That's not true. I'm not. But Robert cut her off with a look, his gaze fierce, almost protective. Let them believe it, he said. It's the only thing keeping you alive now. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself. She hated the way he spoke, hated the finality of it, as though her choices had been stripped away. And yet, beneath her fear, another truth gnawed at her. When his eyes lingered on her, there was something there that unsettled her more than threats or soldiers. It wasn't just possession. It was something deeper. The air between them thickened, charged with fear, anger, and something dangerously close to longing. Karina forced herself to speak, though her voice wavered. You've destroyed my life. Robert stepped closer, his presence towering, overwhelming, but his words carried a rare softness. Or maybe I've just ensured you still have one. Her breath caught, torn between terror and the strange magnetic pull of him. She wanted to slam the door, she wanted to run, but she couldn't move. And deep down, in a place she didn't want to admit existed, she knew her life had shifted the moment she touched his blood. If you woke to find the most feared man in the city had vanished, only to return with an army outside your door, would you run or would you let him protect you? Karina hadn't left her apartment all day. The rows of soldiers remained outside like shadows pressed against the edges of her world. They didn't speak, didn't move except to switch places, their presence an iron reminder that she was no longer anonymous. Robert hadn't left either. He sat in her living room as though he belonged there, his broad frame relaxed in her small chair, his storm-gray eyes taking in every detail of her home. Karina hated how easily he fit himself into her space, how his presence filled every corner and left her restless. Finally, she broke the silence. Why couldn't you protect yourself? A man like you, feared by everyone, and yet I found you bleeding in the street. His gaze shifted to her, calm but sharp. You want the truth? Karina folded her arms, though her stomach tightened at the thought. Yes. Robert leaned back, his voice low and even. I wasn't alone. I had a few of my men with me. We were ambushed. My enemies came fast, well-armed, coordinated. They've been waiting for a chance to corner me. My men fought, but we were outnumbered, outgunned. They begged me to run, said they would hold them off. His jaw clenched, the memory flickering in his eyes. I didn't want to leave them. I always fight along. That's what I'm made for. But they made me leave. Said the family couldn't afford to lose me. So I ran. Got hit along the way. I was losing blood, getting weaker. And that's when you found me. Karina swallowed hard. She wanted to stay detached, but the way his voice cracked, barely noticeable but there, hit something deep inside her. He had lost men, not just soldiers, men he led, men who died for him. And you just let them? She asked, sharper than she meant to. You ran while they chose it, Robert cut in, his eyes locking onto hers. They gave me their loyalty, their lives. That's the weight I carry now and forever. Don't mistake me for someone who doesn't bleed inside, too. Karina's breath caught. The room felt suddenly too small, his words pressing against her chest. She looked away, unable to meet the rawness in his gaze. Their silence stretched, sharp as glass. And then, without meaning to, her lips curved with bitter irony. So you hide here, in my apartment, with your army outside, and I'm supposed to believe you're invincible? A faint smile ghosted across his mouth. You patched me up. That makes you part of the reason I'm still breathing. Her pulse stuttered. The way he said it, like she mattered, like she had become part of his story, unsettled her more than the army outside. By afternoon, the gossip had started. Karina scrolled through her phone with trembling hands, seeing her name already threaded through whispers online. The boss has a nurse? Robert's woman spotted. A claim? A warning? Or both? Her stomach dropped. Even the media had latched on. She wasn't invisible anymore. The phone buzzed again. Elise? Karina answered quickly, pressing the phone to her ear. Elise, what's going on? Elise's voice was sharp, laced with panic. People are talking, Karina. They're saying your street is locked down by Robert's men, that he's there. Please tell me it's not true. Karina's throat closed. Elise, You're out of your mind if you let him stay. Do you have any idea what this means? You're not safe. None of us are. Once you're in his world, you don't get out. Karina's eyes stung, tears pressing hot against the back of her lids. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose this. Then get out before it swallows you. Elise's voice cracked, softer now. Please. Karina hung up before she could break. She stared at the phone in her hand, her pulse pounding. Elise was right. She should run. But the sight of Robert sitting in her living room, silent and unyielding, told her escape wasn't possible anymore. That evening, whispers reached even her apartment walls. She overheard 2 soldiers murmuring by the stairwell. They knew where to strike. Someone tipped them off. Victor will find the traitor. The words clawed at Karina. Betrayal inside his own ranks. Someone had set him up. She pressed her back to the wall, her heart racing. Was this what had brought him bleeding to her? A knife in the dark from someone who should have stood beside him? When she returned to the living room, Robert's gaze found her instantly, reading the tension in her shoulders. What is it? He asked flatly. Karina hesitated. Karina stepped closer, anger rising in her chest despite the danger. You dragged me into this? Do you even know why you care if I survive? Is this gratitude or possession? The words lashed out of her before she could stop them. But she needed to know. Robert's eyes met hers, and for once, his mask slipped. The iron control cracked, revealing something rawer, lonelier. I don't know, he admitted, his voice low, rough. All I know is that when I was bleeding out in the rain, and I saw your face, I wanted to live. The words hit her like a blow. Karina's breath caught, her body trembling. She should hate him for saying it. She should hate the way her heart clenched. But she couldn't, because in his loneliness, she saw something that mirrored her own. And in that moment, for the first time, she felt the fragile beginning of a connection she hadn't wanted, but couldn't deny. If someone feared by the world admitted that your face was the reason he wanted to live, would you push him away, or would you let yourself see the man beneath the legend? The night had settled heavy over Karina's apartment, shadows stretching long against the walls. Outside, the soldiers still stood like statues, their silent watch broken only by the low rumble of cars idling on the street. The air inside was no less suffocating. Karina sat at the edge of her narrow bed, listening to every sound, aware of Robert's presence in the next room. She couldn't escape the thought that her life, once painfully ordinary, was now tethered to him. Every headline online reminded her. Every knock against the building made her heart leap. She was trapped, not by locks or chains, but by his world, and by the growing pull she felt whenever his storm-gray eyes lingered on her too long. Unable to sit with the gnawing weight any longer, she pushed herself up and padded softly into the living room. Robert was there, his body angled toward the window, though his gaze seemed far away. A half-empty glass of whiskey rested on the table beside him, untouched for what looked like hours. His shirt hung open slightly, revealing the fresh bandage she had tied over his wound. She hesitated at the doorway. "You should be resting." His head turned, his eyes locking onto hers with that intensity that never failed to steal her breath. Sleep doesn't come easy when every shadow hides a knife. Karina frowned, stepping closer despite herself. "You said your enemies ambushed you, but soldiers don't just stumble into ambushes like that. Someone must have told them where you'd be." Robert's silence was louder than any confession. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, the muscles in his neck taut. Karina's breath caught. "It wasn't just enemies, was it?" she whispered. "It was your own men." The air between them snapped tight. Robert's hand curled into a fist on the armrest. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his voice, low and raw, filled the room. "Someone close to me betrayed me. They gave my location, my movements, everything. Men I trusted died because of it. And I would have been another body in the gutter if you hadn't dragged me from the rain." The words slammed into Karina's chest. She had suspected betrayal, but hearing him admit it, hearing the wound in his voice that went deeper than the one she had stitched, was a revelation that shifted everything. "You don't know who?" she asked. His storm-gray eyes cut to hers, burning. "Not yet. But I will. And when I do." His words trailed off, but the promise of violence lingered in the silence. Karina hugged her arms tight around herself, suddenly cold. She wanted to recoil, to remind herself that he was dangerous, that she should want nothing to do with him. But instead, what struck her most wasn't the threat in his voice. It was the loneliness etched into every word. "You can't trust anyone," she murmured. Robert leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her, unflinching. "That's not true." Her breath hitched. "What do you mean?" "I trust you." His voice was steady, but beneath it lay something raw, unguarded. "More than anyone right now." The words sank into her like fire. She shook her head quickly, her throat tight. "That's insane. You don't even know me." "I know enough," he countered, rising slowly from his chair, his presence overwhelming in the small room. "You saved me when you could have walked away. You stitched me, risked your life, let me into your home. That means something." Her pulse thundered. He was too close now, his shadow falling over her, his storm-gray eyes burning with a heat that made it impossible to breathe. She wanted to push him back, to insist he was wrong, but her body betrayed her, leaning infinitesimally closer. "You don't understand what you're saying," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't I?" His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek, then slowly brushing a damp strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, sparking through her veins. "Every man I thought I could rely on either fell last night or betrayed me. And yet you—" His thumb traced lightly along her jaw, his voice dipping lower. "You've been more loyal in 24 hours than they were in years." Karina's knees weakened. Her mind screamed that this was madness, that she should pull away, remind him she was just a nurse who wanted safety. But her heart, the part of her that had spent years aching for connection, for someone to see her, betrayed her just as easily as her body. Her voice cracked. "Robert, I'm not yours to trust." His hand lingered, his gaze unrelenting. "And yet I do." The room pulsed with heat, thick with something magnetic neither of them could deny. Their breaths mingled, sharp and uneven, caught between fear and desire. Finally, Karina forced herself back a step, her hand pressed to her chest as though to steady the storm raging inside. "You're making me a pawn in your war," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you even see that? By healing you, by being here, I've already been pulled into this power struggle of yours. They'll use me against you." Robert's expression hardened, though his eyes softened in a way that unraveled her all the same. "I won't let them." "You can't promise that," she whispered. "I can," he said simply, and the conviction in his tone sent another shiver through her. The silence stretched again, charged with everything unspoken, everything dangerous and undeniable between them. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by muffled voices. Karina stiffened, her pulse spiking with panic. Robert glanced toward the window, his entire body tensing like a predator sensing movement in the dark. "They're circling closer," he said, almost to himself. Karina's fear flared. She wanted to scream at him to leave, to take his army, his enemies, his entire world with him. But when she looked back at him, saw the rare vulnerability carved into his features, her anger broke against something softer. Because beneath the Mafia boss, beneath the danger, she saw a man carrying the crushing weight of betrayal and loneliness. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her heart reached for him in the silence. If the most feared man alive told you he trusted you more than anyone, would you run from the weight of it, or would you dare to stay? The night carried a deceptive stillness. Rainwater still clung to the pavement, glinting beneath the dull orange street lamps. Karina had grown used to the shadows outside her apartment. Rows of Robert's soldiers, their presence so constant it almost felt like a grotesque form of security. She hated it, hated being watched, hated being marked. Yet some part of her had begun to depend on it too. Robert had stepped out for a business meeting, leaving his men around. She sat curled on her couch, her phone clutched in her hand. Elise's unanswered messages lit up the screen. "I don't know what you're doing, Karina, but this will eat you alive." She had no words to answer, because Elise was right. And yet Karina couldn't turn back. Not after everything Robert had confessed. Not after seeing the loneliness in his storm-gray eyes. A soft knock at her door broke her thoughts. Not loud, not urgent, just soft. She frowned, rising cautiously. When she peered through the peephole, she saw one of the guards she recognized from Robert's detail, a young man with cropped hair and sharp shoulders. He tilted his head toward the hallway, mouthing something she couldn't quite catch. Her chest tightened. She cracked the door an inch. "What is it?" "Victor sent me," the guard said quickly, his voice low, urgent. "Boss wants you out of here. There's been a breach. Too dangerous to stay." Her heart skipped. She hesitated, glancing back at the rows of soldiers visible through the window. None of them moved. None of them reacted as though danger loomed. Still, fear threaded through her. Why didn't Robert come himself? The guard shifted, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "No time, please." Her instincts screamed. Something was wrong. But before she could slam the door shut, the man lunged forward, shoving it open. Karina gasped as two more figures in black rushed from the stairwell, their hands rough as they grabbed her arms. "No!" she cried, struggling against their grip. But a cloth pressed to her mouth cut her protest short, the sharp sting of chemicals filling her lungs. Her vision swam, darkness pulling at the edges. The last thing she saw was the guard's cold smile as he whispered, "The king bleeds hardest when we take his queen." Robert's rage tore through the apartment when he returned minutes later. Soldiers filled the space, their guns raised, their eyes darting, but it was too late. The door splintered, Karina's scarf left discarded on the floor, a mocking remnant. "Find her!" His voice roared through the building, shattering the silence. "Every block, every street, find her!" Victor caught his arm, trying to steady him. "Robert! She's gone because of me." Robert's fist slammed against the wall, leaving a deep crack in the plaster. His chest heaved, every breath ragged with fury and guilt. "I brought this to her door. I made her a target." Victor's gaze was grim. "Then we'll get her back. But you need control. You can't lead with rage alone." Robert turned on him, his storm-gray eyes raw. For the first time, the mask shattered. Do you understand what they'll do to her? Do you understand that I—" His voice broke, the words torn from his throat. "I love her, Victor. God help me, I love her, and I'll destroy her the same way I destroy everything else I touch." Victor's jaw tightened. He didn't flinch at the confession. He only placed a firm hand on Robert's shoulder. "Then you fight harder, not for power, for her." Robert's chest rose and fell, the truth of his words settling over him like a chain. Love had always been his weakness, and now it was the one thing that could undo him. Karina woke in darkness. Her head pounded, her throat raw. She lay on a cold concrete floor, wrists bound, the damp chill sinking into her bones. The air smelled of rust and mildew, a suffocating reminder she was far from home. Chains rattled nearby. She wasn't alone. "Don't bother screaming," a rough voice growled from the shadows. "No one's coming. You're leverage, nothing more." Karina's stomach knotted. She forced herself upright, her body trembling. "Why me?" "Because he cares," the voice sneered. A figure stepped closer, his face obscured by the dim light. "Robert thinks he's untouchable, but everyone has a weakness, and I believe you're his." Her chest tightened, fear clawing at her throat. She wanted to deny it, wanted to insist she meant nothing to him. But she remembered the way he had looked at her, the way his words had cracked when he confessed trust. And she knew it was true. The man crouched low, his grin twisted. "When he comes for you, and he will, he'll bleed for every step he takes. And if he doesn't—" His eyes narrowed. "You'll rot here, forgotten." Karina bit back a sob, pressing her bound hands to her chest. Forgotten. The word echoed in her, clawing deep into her oldest fear. She had spent years invisible, a ghost even in her own life. To die this way, alone, erased, terrified her more than death itself. Tears blurred her vision. She buried her face in her hands, the weight of despair crushing her. Robert couldn't save her. No one could. Robert stood in the middle of the command room, maps and photographs scattered across the table, his men awaiting orders. His voice was sharp, controlled, but his eyes betrayed him. Storm gray, fractured by anguish. "We find her tonight," he said. "No delays, no mercy." Victor studied him. "You know what this means. Blood will spill, and she might—" "She's alive," Robert cut him off, his voice raw with desperation. "She has to be. If they touch her—" His hand curled into a fist, trembling. "I'll burn the city to ash." For the first time in years, Robert felt the weight of helplessness pressing down, suffocating. Every second Karina was gone, he felt his grip on control slipping. And in that helplessness, the truth carved itself deep into him. Karina wasn't just a nurse who had saved him. She was the reason he wanted to live. And now, she was the reason he feared he might die. If you were stolen away as leverage in a war you never asked to fight, would you hold on to hope or surrender to despair? The cold concrete pressed into Karina's knees as she shifted against her restraints, her breath shallow in the damp air of the abandoned warehouse. Her wrists burned where the rope cut into her skin. She could hear the guards shuffling near the door, their voices low, their words laced with impatience. Fear gnawed at her, sharp and unrelenting, but so did another truth. She wasn't as helpless as they believed. She was a nurse. She knew the body, its weaknesses, its fragile points. And though she had nothing but the clothes on her back, she remembered the small vial in her pocket, the one she had slipped there by habit at the hospital, forgetting it during the chaos of Robert's collapse. A sedative. Just enough to buy time. She waited, her heartbeat pounding in her ears. When one of the guards approached to check on her, crouching low with a sneer, she forced a trembling smile. "My wrists," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They're bleeding. Please." The guard cursed under his breath and grabbed her arm to inspect it. In that moment, Karina slipped the vial into her palm and broke it against the ground. The sharp, acrid scent filled the air, making the man cough and recoil. His grip loosened just enough for her to twist away. She brought her bound hands up hard, striking his nose with all the force she had. He collapsed, groaning, the sedative fumes sinking him deeper into confusion. Another guard rushed forward, furious, but Karina was already moving. She kicked the broken glass toward him, forcing him to stumble, and shouted, "Help me!" into the silence beyond the walls, not because she thought anyone would hear, but because the distraction bought her seconds. Precious seconds. Across the city, Robert stood in the command room, his storm-gray eyes blazing as Victor laid out the latest intel. "They've moved her to the old docks," Victor said, pointing at the map. "It's isolated. Too easy to control. If we go in, we'll be trapped." "Then we don't go in like they expect," Robert growled. He straightened, every line of his body thrumming with purpose. The despair of the night before had calcified into something harder. Resolve. "I won't leave her. Not to them, not to rot." Victor studied him carefully. "You're not speaking as a boss anymore." Robert's jaw tightened, his voice dropping low, stripped of all pretense. "No, I'm speaking as a man in love." The room went still. Even the soldiers shifted, glancing at one another. It was a confession without shame, one that bound them all to his cause. "Then we fight for her," Victor said at last. The plan was simple, brutal, and precise. Robert's men used a decoy convoy to draw enemy forces toward the northern pier, setting off controlled explosions that rattled the docks. While chaos erupted, Robert led a smaller strike team to the warehouse. The night air was thick with smoke and salt. Gunfire cracked in the distance, shouts echoing across the water. Robert moved like a shadow, his wound forgotten, his focus absolute. Inside, Karina's struggle had thrown the room into disarray. One guard was slumped unconscious, the other pacing angrily, muttering threats under his breath. She pressed herself against the wall, breath shallow, every nerve stretched thin. The door burst open. Robert entered first, a storm incarnate, his men flooding in behind him. Bullets flew, sparks ignited, shouts ripped the air apart. The guard who had been pacing barely had time to raise his weapon before Robert's shot dropped him to the ground. "Karina!" Robert's voice tore through the chaos, raw with desperation. Her heart leapt. "Here!" He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hands cutting through her restraints. The moment she was free, she fell into him, trembling, her body weak but her spirit unbroken. He held her tightly, his hand cradling the back of her head, his heart pounding so hard she could feel it against her cheek. "I thought," she choked, tears burning her eyes, "I thought I'd never see you again." His grip tightened, his lips brushing her hair. "You'll never be lost to me. Not while I breathe." The words seared into her, a vow forged in fire and blood. The battle raged around them, but in that moment nothing else existed. They were both scarred, shaken, and yet alive, pulled together not by fate, but by choice, by desperation, by something that had grown between them too powerful to deny. Robert pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. His own were fierce, vulnerable, unguarded. "You're mine, Karina, not because the world thinks it, not because they whisper it, because I can't let you go." Her breath caught, her heart surrendering even as her fear clung tight. She raised a trembling hand to his cheek, her voice breaking. "Then don't." Their lips met in a searing kiss, desperate and raw, born of fear and fury and the relief of survival. Around them, the gunfire faded into background noise, the world narrowed to the fire between them. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads pressed together, Robert's voice was hoarse. "We leave now, together." Karina nodded, her body still shaking, but her heart steadier than it had been in days. For the first time, she didn't feel like a pawn. She felt like a partner. By the time they slipped into the night, escorted by Robert's men, the warehouse behind them was burning. The flames licked at the sky, devouring the place where despair had almost won. And as Robert's arms stayed tight around her, guiding her toward safety, Karina realized their bond was no longer fragile. It had been tempered in fire and fear in the darkest of nights, and it had survived. If someone risked everything to fight through fire and blood to reach you, would you believe in the love that burned between you, or would you still doubt it? The fire from the dock still smoldered in the distance, staining the night sky a deep red. Robert stood in the center of his safe house, his shirt torn, his body marked by the night's battles, yet his eyes sharper than steel. The room was crowded with his men, every one of them tense, waiting. Karina sat on a chair at the far end, her wrists still raw from her captivity, but her gaze unflinching. She had refused to be hidden away, insisted she would see the truth with her own eyes. Victor entered, dragging a man by the collar. His face was one Karina recognized. Rico, the guard who had mouthed lies at her door, the one who had whispered Victor's name as if it carried legitimacy. His lip bled, his eyes wild with defiance. Robert didn't move at first. He simply stared, the silence stretching until it crushed the air out of the room. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, lethal. "You betrayed me." Rico spat blood onto the floor. "You've grown soft, Robert. The others saw it too. A boss doesn't bleed in the streets. A boss doesn't fall for some nurse who should have stayed invisible." Karina flinched at the venom in his words, but Robert's expression didn't waver. His storm gray eyes narrowed, and with a flick of his hand, Victor tossed a folded piece of paper onto the table. "Proof," Victor said flatly. Karina leaned forward as Robert opened it. Inside were ledgers, coded messages, and, most damning, a photograph. Rico meeting with rival leaders at the edge of the city days before the ambush. The same men who had taken Karina. Gasps rippled through the soldiers. Loyalty fractured like glass in that instant, all eyes turning toward Rico. Robert rose slowly, his chair scraping back. The fury in him was volcanic, but he kept it caged, every step deliberate as he approached the man who had nearly destroyed everything. "You sold me out," Robert said. "You killed my men. You tried to use her to break me." He stopped inches away, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But you failed." Rico's laugh was broken, bitter. "Did I? You're not the same, Robert. They all see it. She's made you weak." Robert's jaw tightened, his hand flexing as though he might strike. But then Karina rose. "Stop," she said firmly, her voice carrying through the tense room. Everyone turned. She stepped forward, her knees trembling but her spine straight, meeting Robert's storm with her own calm. "Don't let him define you," she said. Her eyes locked on Robert's, steady, brave. "He wants you to prove him right. To show that you're nothing but blood and vengeance, but you're more than that now. You're more than what he made you." The room held its breath. Robert's men shifted, uncertain, their gazes flicking between their boss and the woman who dared to stand at his side. Robert's chest rose and fell, the war inside him visible in every taut line of his body. For a long, terrible moment, it seemed as if he would snap, that rage would win. But then his hand dropped. He stepped back. "No," he said, his voice steady now, layered with something new, resolve. "I won't let you turn me into what you want." He turned to his men, his voice ringing out like a verdict. "This is what betrayal looks like, and this—" He gestured to Karina, her small form blazing with courage. "Is what strength truly is." Victor's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, and the soldiers bowed their heads in silent agreement. Robert looked at Rico one last time. "Take him. He faces judgment, but not from my hands." The men dragged Rico away, his shouts fading into the night. Silence filled the safe house once more. Robert turned to Karina, and for the first time, the storm in his eyes cleared. "You changed everything," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "I only did what anyone would." "No," he interrupted, stepping closer. "You did what no one else has ever dared. You stood between me and the darkness." He took her hands, his voice raw. "I built this empire on fear, on control. But what good is power if it costs me you?" Karina's breath hitched. "Robert." He pulled her closer, pressing his forehead against hers. "I won't lose you. Not to them, not to this life. I'm done letting this empire own me. From this night on, I don't rule through fear. I rule through something stronger." His lips brushed hers in a kiss that was fierce yet tender, sealing the vow between them. Around them, the men shifted uneasily, not because they doubted him, but because they knew the kingdom itself had changed. When Robert pulled back, he turned to his men, his arm tight around Karina's shoulders. "We rebuild, not as tyrants, but as something new. Anyone who cannot stand with me in this will leave now." No one moved. Loyalty, shaken hours before, solidified like stone. Karina's chest swelled with something fierce and unfamiliar, hope. Not just for herself, but for him, for the kingdom reshaped not by blood alone, but by love. As dawn broke, the city's skyline gleamed against a pale horizon. Robert stood at the window of the safe house, Karina beside him, their hands intertwined. The storm had not passed, not fully, but for the first time, there was light breaking through. If love demanded you lay down your crown of power, would you cling to control, or would you choose the one who saw the truth in you? The hospital smelled of antiseptic and warm linen, the kind of scent that clung to every wall and whispered of healing and survival. For years, Karina had walked these halls like a shadow, slipping unnoticed between patients and staff. She had been the quiet nurse who stayed late, who never raised her voice, who kept her heart hidden behind professionalism. But now, the weight of silence was gone. When she returned, whispers followed her, not the cruel dismissals of before, but hushed respect. The guards outside the hospital doors bore Robert's crest, their black coats a reminder that she was no longer invisible. Not everyone understood. Some looked at her with suspicion, some with fear. But none could deny what she had become. The woman the king himself trusted, the woman he had bled for. Karina tucked a chart under her arm as she entered a room where an elderly man sat hunched in bed. His breath came shallow, his skin pale, but when she smiled, his eyes lit with recognition. "You came back," he rasped. "Yes," she said softly, adjusting his blanket. "I came back." She had promised herself she wouldn't let fear keep her from the work she loved. And though the world outside had changed, she would not abandon this part of herself. Healing wasn't just her skill, it was her soul. Robert appeared that evening, his presence filling the doorway before he said a word. He didn't wear his usual armor of power. No suit, no tie, just a dark shirt rolled at the sleeves, his hair still damp from the rain. Yet even stripped down, he commanded the air. Karina looked up from her patient's bedside, her heart leaping in her chest. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though she couldn't keep the warmth from her voice. "And let you walk these halls without me?" His lips curved, a rare, private smile. "Never." The patient chuckled faintly, his voice like dry leaves. "So this is the man who had the whole city searching." Robert's gaze softened as it landed on Karina. "Yes," he said simply. "This is the woman worth burning a kingdom for." Karina's cheeks warmed, but she didn't protest. Not anymore. Later, when the shift ended, she found him waiting outside beneath the glow of the streetlights. The city hummed quietly, and for the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel heavy with threat. She stopped in front of him, folding her arms. "You can't follow me everywhere. People will think I'm fragile." He stepped closer, his storm-gray eyes steady on hers. "You are not fragile. You are the strongest person I know. But I'll follow you anyway, because I want to, not because I think you need it." Her breath caught, the truth in his words undoing her carefully held defenses. "Robert." He reached for her hands, his voice dropping low. You saved me, Karina. Not just my life. You saved the part of me I thought was long dead. The part that could trust. The part that could feel anything other than rage. He paused, his thumb brushing her knuckles. I won't let you stand in my shadow. You're not my savior alone. You're my equal, my future. Tears stung her eyes. Do you mean that? His hand moved to her cheek, his touch reverent. With everything I am. The kiss that followed wasn't desperate like the ones before. It was slow, deliberate, filled with a promise that neither time nor enemy could erase. Weeks passed, and the world adjusted to their new truth. Robert began dismantling parts of his empire, relinquishing territories he had once ruled with iron control. The men who remained didn't serve him out of fear anymore. They followed because he had chosen to lead differently, because he had chosen her. Karina found herself in rooms she never expected, meetings where men once too powerful to glance her way now listened when she spoke. She didn't seek control, didn't crave influence, yet her words mattered because Robert made them matter. He introduced her not as a possession, not as a woman who happened to be by his side, but as someone who shaped his vision. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the city from his penthouse balcony, Karina leaned against the railing, the cool wind lifting her hair. I never asked for this, she murmured. I know, Robert said, stepping behind her, his arms encircling her waist. But it found you anyway, and you faced it with more courage than I ever had. She tilted her head back against him, her eyes closing. Sometimes I think about that night, about how different things might have been if I'd just walked past you in the rain. His lips brushed her temple. If you had, I'd be dead, and so would the man I used to be. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was full, alive with unspoken truths. The next morning, Karina returned to her rounds at the hospital. Children laughed in the waiting room. Patients murmured in soft voices, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a ghost. Robert arrived near midday, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one in front of her, ignoring the startled looks of the staff. You've been working since dawn, he said simply. Drink. She smirked, shaking her head. You're insufferable. And you love me anyway. Her smile softened. Yes, she whispered. I do. As the sun dipped low, painting the windows with gold, Karina paused in the quiet of the hallway, watching Robert speak with a group of nurses. He looked out of place in the sterile white corridor, a king among healers, yet his expression was unguarded. In that moment, she realized the truth. She hadn't just saved a man. She had saved the part of him no one else could. The part that longed for more than thrones and shadows. The part that wanted to be seen not as a monster, but as human. And he, in turn, had seen her. No longer invisible, no longer forgotten. Loved, wholly and without condition. That night, as they walked home together, Robert paused beneath a lamppost, pulling her close. The city moved around them, indifferent, yet it felt as though the world itself held its breath. I used to think love was a weakness, he confessed, his forehead resting against hers. Now I know it's the only reason I'm still standing. You are the strongest thing in my life, Karina, and from this day forward, the world will know you are not just the woman who saved me. You are the woman I will live and die beside. Karina's heart swelled, tears glistening as she whispered back, and you're not just the man I found bleeding in the rain. You're the man I chose, the man I'll choose every day. Their kiss sealed the vow, not with desperation, but with peace. The kind of peace neither of them had ever thought possible. The city still whispered, still gossiped. Some would always fear him. But Karina no longer cared. She had her patience, she had her heart, and she had him. Together, they had reshaped not just an empire, but their very souls. And as the moonlight bathed them in silver, Karina finally believed in the impossible, that love could rise from darkness, fierce and unbreakable. Would you dare to love someone the world fears most, if he swore to protect you with his life?